Please awaken from your slumber. I need a hand to fight these lies. Please open up your eyes. Our enemies are at the door now, and I can't win this on my own. Don't make me stand alone. Whether or not you believe it to be true, take a stand or you'll soon be swept away. And all of us will fall victim to your apathy as we stand against the rising of the tide.
Welcome back, Info Warriors. This second edition of the combined efforts of Infowars.com and FreedomRadio.org's Freedom Files, we're going to talk about something which is vital to each and every person in America's survival: food. Where it comes from, where it used to come from, and why the change is a dangerous thing for your health and survival. As a related topic, we will also discuss the slow death of the family farm and what implications this has on our present and future. This is all-out war on Monsanto. We here at Infowars want to let the food Nazis know we're not taking this lying down any longer. We're going to talk about the latest attempted assault on the family farm, the Child Labor Department's proposed new rules on farm child labor, thankfully thwarted by the efforts of patriotic Americans. We will also clue you in on steps you can begin to take now to help curb your dependence on big agribusiness, and to help steer our country back to the days when an apple a day didn't cost you your freedom. At this point in our nation's history, the number of family-run farms is in serious decline, with no sign of slowing its descent. In 1935, there were over 6.8 million farms in America. Today, there are about 2 million. Obviously, our population has increased, and food product demand along with it. So what does this trend signify? It shows us the unfortunate migration of the bulk of food production from the small family farm to the big agribusiness world of bee-killing, rat-sterilizing genetic modifiers of big corporations, such as the industry giant Monsanto. There was a time in America where a man of determination and perseverance could carve out a niche for himself in this country through hard work, patience, and self-sufficiency. Men and women like my grandparents, who began with nothing, and through the sweat of their brow and the strain of their backs, saw barren lands filled with the life they planted into the earth they worked. It was as much a part of them as the blood in their veins. Many of them now looking at our nation with wonder. What happened to this world they live in? The unfortunate truth of the world, which many born of a simpler time look upon with sadness, is becoming increasingly dire. Recently, Monsanto genetically modified superproduct research and development has been linked to the disappearance of bees from their hives all across the nation, not to mention Monsanto's all-out war against the average American farmer. I am speaking, of course, of their habit of suing farmers whose crops are accidentally contaminated by the Biotech big business's transgenic seeds and pollen. Monsanto openly admits to filing at least 144 lawsuits against farmers between 1997 and 2010, while settling another 700 cases out of court, accusing the farmers of patent infringement as a result of non-genetically modified crops being cross-pollinated with Monsanto patent-owned genetically modified plants. Groups such as the Organic Seed Growers and Trade Association, along with many others, have filed suit to prevent Monsanto's predatory patent lawsuits. Unfortunately, the case was dismissed, and the group has now filed a notice of appeal. While Monsanto poses the most notable threat to food freedom right now, the small farm is being attacked from many other angles, one of which is a recent attempt by the Department of Labor to make it unlawful for children to work on their own family farms, an activity that has long been a cornerstone of the agriculture industry here in America. Fortunately, the proposed legislation was met with nothing less than a banshee's cry of disapproval, and President Obama was forced to flip on the issue. But make no mistake, this is not the last we've heard of this type of legislation, which not only cripples the family farm, but eliminates the concept of parental consent altogether. We here at Infowars talked to some experienced members of the small farm community to get some insight on just how the concept of a family that works together was instrumental to the small farms that used to flourish in this country.
They began to get big enough to carry a hoe and dig in the dirt. It started out in the garden, thinking the three little fellas used to hold their arms out, and I'd load them up with the house. They'd start shucking, and then I'd go to one in the house and start cleaning it to freeze it. We had three little boys, and usually in the summertime there was 3 or 4 more, so in order for us to eat well, we had to raise. He was going through the yard with a hoe. I said, "Where in the world are you going?" "I'm going up to chop tobacco." I said, "Well, he's definitely going to be a farmer." And he did it on his own. Nobody told him to. When they bought the tractor and the hay roller, it was the first one in this area, and they bought their first 2 cars, paid their insurance, bought their own gas and everything because they had their own money. And then Rusty and Owen grew a crop together. Of the 3 boys, only one still at least part-time farming. It was an excellent way to learn about life and death, and also to learn of the God of creation because they watched it grow. When they were baling hay and working in the tobacco and stuff, they worked hard during the day, but when they come in, well, no work and no play. Like there was always a house full of little boys in the summertime. Boys that lived in town didn't have anything to do, and for some reason or another, they seemed to enjoy throwing them rolls of hay and chopping tobacco and whatever else that the farm offered at the time. It's what you learned from your parents on. At the time our grandkids came along, we no longer chop tobacco because we use chemicals for the weed kill. To make a good living off the farm, it got to the point where you had to lease a lot more land in order to raise bigger crops or more. You almost had to have a college education to keep up with we kept up on the cattle production and stuff pretty well. And that's one thing that is still good in this area is the cattle production. Tobacco crop now, at one point we were raising over 60 acres of tobacco, and our son now raises about 5 or 6, and that's enough to pay, I'm sorry to say, his health insurance for the year. It takes that whole crop just about to do that.
And while we've gone over the most noted threats to food freedom, there are countless other circumstances which threaten the right to choose what you eat. But some big biotech companies, such as Biotech, based here in my hometown, try to increase food production by natural means. In fact, long before I was an info warrior, I used to work here. But even natural solution-based companies such as this one practice and endorse sciences that test the boundaries of just what is natural. Rumors of cattle with glass stomachs, long thought to be a ridiculous notion, are regularly spotted in their fields, an advertisement to the grotesque and nature-violating work of many of these firms. Now that we've informed you of the imminent threats to your family's health and food freedom, what can you do about it? A simple greenhouse such as this one I built from mostly recycled materials can be made for very little. Mine cost me less than $100. With a little ingenuity and self-reliance, anyone could build such a structure on the cheap. If you have a yard, till up a section and plant some beans, tomatoes, and corn. Buy non-genetically modified seeds, which you are able to again harvest from this year's crop, and plant with them again in the future. Because let's face it, you don't want anyone having that kind of power over you. Without food, we are all literally dead men. Thanks again for joining us for this special edition of the Infowars Nightly News and the freedomradio.org Freedom Files. Tune in tomorrow for more propaganda slaughtering mayhem. I'm David Reinheimer, reporting for Infowars.com.